As the owner and CEO of two businesses, transformational leadership coach Renee Murata knows a thing or two about guiding with both purpose and compassion. Working to encourage more women to speak out and take charge, she hopes to show that collaboration and cooperation definitely do have a place in decisive leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, please open your ears, open your minds, and help me welcome in Renee Murata to the Mind Dog TV podcast. Renee, welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
It's
I love the silliness. It's great. Life is just too short to be serious. So please,
I
feel free.
I try to keep it light whenever I can, but sometimes. Yesterday, I had a show about suicide at 1:00 in the afternoon, and then I had to deal with 3 comedians right in a row after that, and this is like weird switching gears. And so this is a kind of a series, but it's not a life or death situation. But so workplace stuff. Now, I want to get this out of the way because I feel like I thought we fought the war of the sexes in the 1970s. And I thought when Billie Jean King beat whatever that guy's name was, I can't even remember his name anymore, Bobby Riggs? Yeah. Bobby Riggs? Is that it? Anyway, when she beat him, I thought that put an end to this forever. I can tell you, from my perspective, 35 years in the corporate world, I worked for mostly women bosses, very powerful women. It wasn't until the last 5 or 7 years of my career before I decided to leave the corporate world that I actually had a male boss, male CEO. But most of the time I worked for women. Am I wrong in the assertion that the world had most of the stuff that I thought was keeping women down in the corporate world and in the business world had been resolved? I guess I'm wrong in that. Yes.
Well, you led a very exceptional life, evidently. There are very few women that are in positions of authority and power. In fact, less than 10% of women are in a higher level of leadership. Or maybe I should say it this way, less than 10% of higher levels of leadership are held by women. And so, yeah, there's still a lot of work out there, but it's men and women that are keeping women down. It's not the same issues that it was before, although those issues are still there. It's other issues as well. A lot of it is women just feeling like they can. The suppression has happened for so long.
Right. Well, last month we because at the end of every month on the entertainment edition of this program, we review old films, classic films, and we reviewed The Apartment from 1960s, and that's the typical old boys club, male-dominated IBM world, and New York Life, those companies that had 10,000, 20,000 employees, and were all men and basically abused women. I think we've come a long way since then, but obviously we still have a way to go.
Yeah, we definitely have. It's changed since then, for sure. But there's still a long ways to go.
Right.
Absolutely.
So how do you propose we get there?
Well, that's a multifaceted task, right? So first, men have to be willing to allow it, and there's a lot of shift, but there's also, at the same time that I say there's a lot of shift, there's still a lot of men that are resistant to it. Women also are just as likely to say that they don't believe that women can lead as a man is. So interestingly enough, some of my strongest opponents were women, not men. And then women have to believe that they're capable of it. So there's like a multi-tiered kind of thing that has to happen in order for women to really step into leadership.
Again, you're right. I guess I have led a very unique life in the corporate world anyway. And I've had a lot of different careers. So most of the places that I worked where women were in charge and making, they were completely the leaders in the industry, were smaller businesses. But one corporation that I worked for, I have to tell you now, it was started by a man, and nepotism. He handed it down to his son, who was the CEO, but brain dead son. But he was smart, brain dead, but he was smart enough to hire competent professionals. Now, there were probably, and I'm not exaggerating here, 400 vice presidents in the company. Out of those 400, I think 300 were or close to 300 were ladies, and the top one was a lady, and she was very powerful, a very strong leader. So, and everybody I worked for, there was a chain of vice presidents, and I was at the director level. I answered to 5 women above me, and each
Wow.
one of them were very powerful women, and each one has gone on to, I believe they're all CEOs of companies now. So is it, and I don't think that was by design, by the way. I don't think it was like mandated, like an idea where
Right.
where we have to meet quotas or something to promote women. I just think they were very powerful and good leaders, effective leaders. So is that the answer? Just being good enough that they can't say no, right?
Well, that's a part of it for sure. Absolutely. I've worked for women that shouldn't have been in a leadership role, or maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I've worked for women that were not powerful, but they put on the air of being powerful, and so that caused a lot of problems with other people within the organization, and so it really kind of turned people off to women in leadership. But working for powerful women that are capable and can build strategies and can build leadership and teams and all of that, that's I haven't had that pleasure at all.
I actually have, but I would say this. I worked for a while in the hair and beauty industry, which
Mm,
you would think would be dominated by women, but it's not. It is dominated by men.
a
Although
lot of men.
the people that I worked for were all women and very powerful women, or very, I shouldn't say very, because they weren't all that effective. They were very aggressive women.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so I think your point about does that hurt when women arise to a level of leadership? They're not quite good leaders. They just got there because of aggression and are poor leaders. Does that help women and hurt women in general?
So I believe that it hurts women in general because it gives a bad name, right? For people start to look at women, especially a woman who's an assertive woman. If a woman is an assertive woman, and she's a good leader, then people appreciate it. But if she's aggressive, which is slightly different than assertive, and she's not effective, then people look at women poorly and they really start to judge all women based on that. So, a woman that puts on the man suit, I'm going to say it that way, right? And if a woman puts on a man suit and doesn't really know how to wear it, then it can be a problem. But a woman who can really step fully into her leadership as a woman, be an effective leader, be assertive, speak her mind without being domineering, aggressive, all of those other words that I probably can't say on radio. Those kinds of women I've come across a few of those in my lifetime. Very few that I've come across that are the assertive, caring, and can think strategy, can think outside the box, can think, revenue streams, those sorts of things. So part of it is that they're not taught. Women aren't taught that. So they see men being assertive and taking charge, and they think that means being aggressive, right? But it's not. It's not the same thing.
Right. I want to get into the ideas of masculine and feminine energies in a moment. And I know that's a big part of what you talk about now. I just want to get some for the audience. Not even sure if I remember this correctly because I talked to so many people, but I could have swear in doing the research on you recently that I came across that your background was in physics. Do I have that
Yes.
correctly? So
Yes.
you're a physicist you were educated as a physicist, became a professional physicist, and transition to this world. That's a strange transition. Can you just explain to me
Yeah.
how that happened?
A physics degree and I have a mathematics degree. And I ended up working for an organization as a electrical engineer assistant. And my boss, because in the valley that I was living in at the time, there was really nothing for me. And my husband wasn't done with school yet. So I ended up working for an electrical engineering firm, and my boss was one of the very few bosses that I've had over the years. It was phenomenal. And I realized that I could speak different languages. Like, so I could speak the computer engineer speak, I could speak the mechanical engineer, the marketing director, the finance director. Like I realized that I communicate, and not only could I understand what they were saying, I could translate for the other person. So, a marketing person uses different language, they have different energy than the software engineer. And he has different language or she has different language than the operations person. So I realized that I could facilitate these kinds of meetings rather easily and fluidly. And so I switched gears. We ended up moving from Oregon to San Francisco area. And I ended up working in a refinery, a gas and oil refinery for a while. That just so that I could get myself down to California where my husband was. Yeah, so then I ended up doing that for a while. Then I started doing process safety in the gas and oil world, which is really facilitating those teams that have engineers, mechanics, operators, management. So I totally shifted out of the physics and math into facilitating teams. And from there, then transitioned into working with women in leadership.
I think it's fair to say then, when you were just starting out as an undergrad and maybe going through some counseling, that the career path that you had envisioned for yourself didn't come close to what you just described.
At all.
Well, I think that's an important for anybody listening, male or female. I think it's important to realize that, especially if you're a young person, even if you're already you're postgraduate and in the business world, that be prepared for changes and adaptations and forks in the road that you have no idea and opportunities that may come up in your life. I think that's an important point of it. So, and by the way, I just want to say this. I've been trying to get like some physicists to come on to talk physics with me for a long time, and I never thought the first physicist I would actually get on the program would be during the business edition to talk about business. So here we are, though. So let's talk about, basically what is feminine leadership? What does that mean?
So, for me, feminine leadership really is about the soft skills, bringing in the soft skills. Right. So I don't believe when I say feminine leadership, I don't mean women in leadership. I mean men and women that are comfortable in their skin. They own that feminine side of them, the soft skill side, the nurturing side, and women who are also quite capable of really stepping into their intuition and stepping into their knowing.
Right.
So that's what it means for me.
I mentioned the last 5 to 7 years, I were the period of my life where I got introduced to the tough male bosses. And I worked for one company for just 2 years, and it was intolerable, where there were 5 male bosses, no women bosses in the place at all, no women in any, except the CEO's wife, who was head of HR, but she was really it was nepotism, not qualified for the position. Anyway, 5 bosses, and I attributed it to being old school, though, and this idea, and I think maybe this is what we're talking about, because I see these old men and 70-year-old men, and I'm sorry, I'm in that age group. I'm allowed to call that old men who were set in as CEOs and in leadership positions, CFOs, vice presidents, as old school foreman, drill sergeant types, and thinking that was the way that you were going to motivate people and lead people by forcing them and being tough. And I think as the new generations are coming in, and I can say new generation because I'm old as well, the new generation of leadership, whether it's male or female, I'm seeing more of a push of this idea of understanding you're dealing with people. People have different leadership, modalities that are going to get them to follow you. But the most important thing is trust. And then the other part of that is really getting to know their individual needs and their own individual buttons to help push that leadership. So I think it's a generational thing as much as gender thing. Do you agree?
I do. I think generationally, the younger generation, I can say that too, see the gray hair. I won't tell you how old I am though. The younger generation definitely is more in touch in some respects. And yet, interestingly enough, because there's so much in, the phone, the lack of connection, also it's a weird balance. It's like they expect there to be more connection, and yet when I'm sitting in a meeting and 3 of them are sitting on their phones and only one of them is paying attention to me, it's like, hello, put the phones down, right? Connect, let's talk person to person. So it's a weird balance, but I do think that it's both gender and generational.
Right.
Yes.
And now, so when you talk about, because we can get, I can open this up to getting a lot of hate mail, info@minddogtv.com, by the way, if you're going to send this hate mail. But when we talk about male and female energies in this stuff,
Mhm.
aren't we kind of stereotyping a little bit, and don't we kind of, because there have been tough
Yeah.
women. Margaret Thatcher was not necessarily,
Well, okay. So I think it's important to differentiate between distorted masculine and feminine energies and sacred or positive masculine feminine energies.
okay,
Because there really is a distinction. Like there's the distorted masculine, which is the very domineering, the very, but a woman who's in a distorted masculine energy is going to be very aggressive, right? Whereas if you have somebody who is in their distorted feminine, they might be kind of whiny, they might be kind of manipulative, and you can call it masculine, you can call it feminine. So maybe it's not so much about the masculine feminine energies, although we tend to attribute it to a masculine or feminine kind of energy. It's really whether they're in that distorted, that nastiness, the negative side of things, or whether they're in the divine, sacred, positive kinds of energies. So for me, I'm very careful to distinguish between, I have like 4 columns that I put different energies in: distorted masculine, divine feminine, distorted feminine. So
yeah.
that's kind of where I live my life.
The toughest boss I ever worked for was a woman who was 5 foot tall, I think, probably in high heels. I mean, but a
Mhm.
very, very petite woman. But and I had been there before she arrived, and then she was hired to kind of fix the company. And it was a company of 27,000 employees, and she was hired as a senior vice president and came in with a huge chip on her shoulder. But she did not have any of what I would consider feminine energies. She wasn't, she had no nurturing at all. And that's what I associate with feminine energy, with at least,
Right.
yeah, kind of knowing that people have their frailties and understanding a little bit, and not that doesn't mean you can't be a tough and demanding boss and
Right.
still be compassionate. But how do you teach that or instill that as a leader to
Mm.
future leaders in your organization?
Well, so that's a really good question because it really is about understanding where, first of all, why. My very first boss was 4'11" in high heels. So I hear that, right? And she was a very, she screamed at me. She called me things my first day on the job, which brought people out of the aisles into the aisles to see what was going on. So I know exactly what you're talking about there. That distorted energy is very painful, and very unnecessary, because you can be compassionate and strong. And I think what happens is a lot of people equate compassion with weakness, right? They think, well, if you're a compassionate person, you must be a bleeding heart, a pushover, but that's not the case. Compassion is just simply seeing another person as a human being. And then, as with doing so, you can speak to them with kindness, even as you're letting them go, right? So I had to fire somebody, I had to let somebody go, and on a human level, I could feel for this person, right? At the same time, on a business level, I had to recognize that it wasn't a good fit for me. It wasn't a good fit for my company. So you have to learn how to set your boundaries, even when you have compassion, and you don't have to do it in a way that is nasty. So I think a lot of people do. They feel compassion is a weakness.
Yeah, I agree. On that same kind of idea, leaders can make mistakes. Anybody,
Oh,
and everybody is fallible. We're all fallible, and so this idea of being able to apologize or acknowledge a mistake by leadership, and how you do that without losing the confidence of your team, I think can be a general art form that not everybody can master. And I know a lot of, again, going back to the grumpy old man example, a lot of those guys can never. And we can look at Donald Trump. All right, he's incapable of acknowledging I made a mistake, and so can that be taught to be able uh, to do that in a way that encourages confidence and instills confidence, still, but acknowledging that I screwed up. This is on me. Let's fix this. But the buck stops here.
Right. So it's exactly that, right? It's exactly what you say. You have to just acknowledge it, right? So I had a situation where I had to acknowledge a mistake. I almost ended up driving one of my businesses into the ground because of a poor decisions on my end. And so I had to come to my employees and say, hey, look, this is what happened. I own it. I did it. We're in a really bad place. I'm just letting you know if you choose to leave, that's your choice. I understand. Here are the steps that I'm taking to remedy the situation. One person opted to leave, the rest opted to stay. It was the hardest day of my life. Straight up, the most difficult day of my business life is to sit down with my employees and tell them that. And at the same time, by me being honest, and I didn't have to give them all of the gory details, but by me being honest, it instilled in them a confidence and a trust in me to always be real and always to watch their back. So because I was honest with them about everything, now there's a more collaboration, there's more trust, there's more authenticity between all of us, there's more camaraderie between all of us. It's a very different atmosphere now.
Can that be taught, or does it have to only be modeled and take forever to kind of model that for
Mm.
young people in your organization? Because that could take 20 years, and we don't always have 20. So
Right.
can what you're talking about be taught or
I
trained?
think it can be taught, but somebody has to want to learn it. And so therein lies the challenge, right? I think people have to see the value in it and understand that that's how you build trust. Being vulnerable is how you build trust, but there is a fine line of vulnerability. And so that piece of it, yes, it can be taught. Um, Maybe through some coaching. It's not like there's a class that a person could take to learn it.
Shifting gears just slightly here, because we're talking about leadership within an established organization, and how women
Mm-hmm.
can rise to the top of an established organization or not be overlooked in for what their value is to that organization. But in entrepreneurship, now I, as a consultant for a lot of people, I have to tell you, it seems to me women are taking the bull by the horns to use it. In the entrepreneurial world, I'm seeing far more women taking risks now, starting businesses, and I like that idea about it. But how does this what you're talking about translate to becoming a leader of a brand new organization, even as a first time leaders? So they've worked for somebody else, and of course, everybody
Right.
is in leadership. I know, but to come out and decide I'm going to be a leader for something brand new. Is there anything different that you
Oh
teach
yeah.
that applies to that?
Yes. Wow. That's a loaded question. Yes. And yes. So the women that are stepping into leadership, I applaud every one of them because I was one of them. There is a lot to learn. Learning how to be so first of all, a lot of women step into leadership, start their own businesses and they think they have to do everything. So they have to learn to trust somebody else, right? And so that's the first thing. But if they don't trust somebody else, how is somebody else going to trust them? So it's a reciprocal kind of thing. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that a lot of times, because of where they come from, they may see models. The models of leadership that they recognize or know are only those distorted energy ones, whether it's a man or a woman, doesn't really matter, but they don't really know that they can bring compassion into leadership and be and bring strength and bring values and bring whatever else that they need to bring into the strategies and build revenue streams and figure out all of the various pieces. So they're only focused on this piece of it. So it's if they come from a corporate world somewhere and they had the job that was this big, they may not recognize all of the other pieces of it. Or if they do see all the other pieces of it, they go into overwhelm, they go into fear, and then they start acting like the very, the short women that we both worked with, right? So they step into that kind of energy because they're in fear and overwhelm instead of recognizing that, oh, if I just step and take a breath, find some people that are maybe they're not going to be my best friend, but they're competent at this piece of things that I need them to do, and then build that trust through the vulnerability, authenticity, etc. So
Right.
it's a yeah, it's a
Yeah,
challenge.
I know it is, and I think this idea of because a lot of people confuse management with leadership.
Yes.
So, and what you're talking about there is micromanaging. They want to be micromanagers of everything with that happens in their business, and fail to or refuse to kind of dole out and delegate work, and because of trust issues. I
Because,
get that.
well, some of it's trust issues, but some of it's because they don't know how, right? So a lot of women don't know how to delegate. They don't know how to make decisions to hand something off to someone else. They don't know how to mentor somebody else. Right. So because they haven't been mentored, they were never taught how to delegate. So it's really interesting. Men, and this is where we come into that gender conversation we started with at the beginning. Right? So men are taught all of those leadership kinds of skills, where women are taught management skills, and they are different skill sets, slightly different, but different. And so in the corporate world, women aren't taught those things for a variety of reasons.
Right. There's a huge political rabbit hole here.
Oh, yes.
Because I know there are people on what I call the intellectual dark web. These people who think of themselves as the future thinkers of what's right and what's wrong, and put out things there. A lot of these guys, most of the ones who are well known preaching the gospel of this stuff, are preaching that there are traditional roles and gender roles and things that are we're naturally born and inclined to do, and conflating all this supposedly scientific data that is questionable in a lot of ways. So, but they're out there preaching this stuff, and to me it smells like BS almost always. But I had a lady on. This is just it plays into this, so I have to tell the story. I had a lady on who was actually a former porn star. She's pretty much still in the adult industry somehow. Just had a baby, so she's not filming, but she's a disciple of these guys. And she told me, because I was talking about empowering women and stuff, and she said in the USA, women don't need any empowerment anymore. Men. She just had a son, I guess, which plays into part of her. Now I'm going to be pro male, but there is this whole political agenda to a point where I'm talking to somebody you would think would be an ultra liberal who is an adult film star, now reading this far right wing idea of gender roles, and boys should play with soldier toys and girls should play with dolls. Does any of that have this idea of environment and upbringing? Does that play into the future of women's leadership possibilities when they grow up?
I don't think so. I think it's about being open-minded. Women who buy into that are really, I know some of them, so I can say this, they're still searching.
We locked up on.
There's something inside of here that is capable of doing it.
Can you say that again? We locked up just for 1 second and lost you.
So I find a lot of women, and I know several of these women that you're talking about, so I get it, right? That are still searching out there somewhere for somebody to take care of them without recognizing that they have that ability within themselves. And whether it's fear that drives them to look out there, or whether it's a lack of knowing, or who knows what it is, right? I don't know. I can't speak to that because I was never that way. But the concept of the gender roles, right? I mean, I know too many women that are capable of doing the science. I know too many women that are capable of doing. I was always good at math, for example. Like even if I didn't want to do math, I was still that person that could do math. I used to actually miss problems so that I didn't stand out too high in the classroom, because it just used to make my best friend crazy that she would study like crazy and I wouldn't do any studying, and I'd get 100% on the test and she'd get a 70%. Right? So I would dumb myself down just so that I wouldn't stand out too high. And it's too bad that I did that. And I'm teaching my children and my grandchildren to not do that, because every woman and every man is good at what they're good at. Right? Math was just a natural for me. I didn't ask for it. It just was.
Right. Well, that is a point I try to make so often on this program. I think a lot of leaders people in positions of leadership, I should say, fail to recognize that each person has an individual genius, something they're really good at, and it may not be what you want them to have genius in sometimes. So you have to learn to kind of read people and use them for the strengths they bring to the team, rather than try to force the strengths you want them to have on them, especially if they're already on your team. I mean, it's one thing if you're recruiting somebody, but if they've already been placed on your team, they're valuable. They're part of your team at this point. You have to kind of recognize what their strengths are and how you can apply their strengths to what you do, rather than try to force around into a square peg or whatever it is. Square peg into a,
square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, that thing. So, but this idea of the political nature of it now, this plays into the business world in that they're trying to make it so that people can express their individuality, their personality, and bring that to the office. Now that takes some of the human factor out, and we're not going to be robots, right? So we can or you can make the rules, but it seems unproductive to me, and this is why I want to get your feedback on, to say like women wearing high heels and perfume in the office place is not business attire. When women feel the need to do that, whatever, you can't be who you are. Where do you fall on that in that discussion?
That's kind of funny because I'm a California girl, and even though I wasn't born there, that's my mindset: California, Hawaii, right? So that's flip flops and tank tops. I'm in a tank top.
Sounds good to me.
So I was actually interviewing a young man from East Coast somewhere, and and he was an engineer, and so he was coming into. We were living in Houston, and so I flew him into Houston, and I said, just so you're aware, I said, I'm going to be in some casual linen pants and bare feet when we meet, so please don't wear the 3-piece suit, right? And he goes, oh, that's good to know. Thank you. So he showed up in, khakis and a little bit more casual, but that was what he was comfortable in, right? The 3-piece suit. Whereas I was far more comfortable in, the pajama looking pants, So I personally, unless it's, like when I'm presenting, I'm more inclined. I love high heels. I have a million pair of high heels. I have a closet full of them. And so when I'm in a certain environment, I wear the high heels, and in other environments, I don't. So I don't have an issue with it one way or another. I understand that there are places that want that. They want that professional looking, whatever professional is. Professional is a very subjective concept. I think that for me personally, I want people to be comfortable in their skin, whatever that comfort level is for them, up to a certain point, of course, and allow them to be who they are. But then again, I really am about bringing out the best in everybody. So I know that when I was in college, I really looked around at how different people learn. So some people are auditory learners, some people are visual learners, some people are kinesthetic learners, right? So for me, if I'm writing something, I'm remembering what you're saying. That's just how I am. And so my notes consisted of, doodles and drawings and everything else, but that's how I learned. And so if I learn that way and my husband has to hear everything, then obviously in a business environment, we're going to see, do, and react in different ways. And so I'm going to figure out what's best in you and bring that out. And it makes for a more cohesive team and more collaboration. And if I try and force that square peg into that round hole, then you're not going to bring the best version of who you are. And so that's my take on it, for sure.
Yeah, I think, and I'm trying to segue into this discussion of words and how words matter, but I think the idea of this women shouldn't be too sexy in the workplace, and in that line of what's too sexy can move depending on the observer, I guess.
Right.
But the idea is that the Me Too movement, or whatever you want to call it, where sexual harassment or sex harassment, I guess is the best way to describe it, claims at work are just skyrocketing. And so we're trying to dictate on how do people should dress. And again, that dress stuff, it doesn't come down to males, it comes down to women. And it comes back to the idea of, well, she's dressing too sexy. She deserves to be harassed, or
Right.
blame the victim attitude of it. But I think that's where it comes from, and we're trying to be really careful about the words we can use, and we don't want to be provocative at all, or be seen as provocative. I think that's where it comes in. So transitioning that to words matter and what can be said and not said in workplaces. Where do we go from there?
Well, so, it's interesting because I see where you're trying to segue. Language is a really important thing. And if we are clear about our language, and men or women, right? So women have to be very clear about, these are my boundaries. These are my boundaries, and that's it, right? So there's that piece of it. And then if we use language that says, these are my boundaries, but, right? So these are my boundaries, but, so there's this kind of thing going on. So that gives a different kind of energy to a conversation. So we have to be very clear about our language, men and women, and we have to be very clear about the energy behind our words too. So the energy behind words, a lot of people don't really pay attention to the energy behind words. A lot of people struggle with that, or I shouldn't say they struggle with it. A lot of people just don't pay attention to it. So I hear, for example, I just finished a class this last week, a breathwork class actually, and I was told, Renee, you did a great job, but. Okay, so the English language, but gates everything. And so I know that what she meant was, Renee, you did a great job, and here's some enhancements that I'd like to make, or suggest. So we don't pay attention to our language. There isn't a lot of care in the words that we're using and the energy behind the words and how it's being delivered. And we don't pay attention to the words that other people are using and the energy behind those words. And so, that leads to a lot of problems, a lot of challenges between men and women, between women and women. It leads to this kind of, where am I and who am I and what did you just say? So without that clarity of our language and the energy of the words that we just used, can really lead to a lot of issues. So I pay a lot of attention when I'm writing script, when I have somebody who does my social media. And so she has started to learn my language. And so I'll go in and I'll make modifications, because I don't use words like but unless it's a deliberate use of it. I typically don't use words should, would, could, try. Try is not a word that I use, right? I'm trying to be more professional. Really? So I'm very conscious of the language that I use, and that, because I'm conscious, and I think a true leader is very conscious of the language that they use. And that's one of the distinguishing factors for me between a leader and a manager, right? Is the language that they use and the energy of the words.
Well, that there's a whole lot, and I agree with everything you just said there. But here, and I think you brought this up and said this, but I'm going to state it in my way, just so I'm clear that we're on the same page here. I learned a lot about those words in the '80s too. Read a lot when I was reading about NLP, take the butt out of your mouth, and what try really means, and all that stuff. But when they teach you that stuff, at least when I was taught that stuff 40 years ago, you assume that everybody else knows that. So although you eliminate the word but from your vocabulary to whatever extent you do that, when you hear somebody else say it, you assume that they've had the same training that you did and know that everything after that but negates everything that came before it. Well, they don't understand that, so you can assume the wrong message. But when you hear somebody else say but, and without getting clarification, now all of a sudden you have an idea that, oh, so they're being negative about what, and where they really meant to say but they said but. So sometimes it's a matter of, and I think this is really simple, but we don't get it. Direct communication and saying, can you clarify what you mean by that? Because I just want to make sure that what the meaning is behind that, because maybe you haven't had the same education or same training or same exposure to these ideas that I have. Yes?
Exactly. Yeah. And if you are aware of the fact that you have that training. And if you go into it assuming that other people may or may not, I assume that they don't, just so you're aware, because I've heard too many people that say this but mean that and mean that. So I make the assumption that on the side of they don't, they're not aware. That way I can get that clarity. I ask for it.
Right. But this whole conversation leaves open the door for and we're coming back to male versus female behavior here. And Governor Andrew Cuomo has been accused in New York here, and I don't know how far close you follow this stuff over in Italy, but Governor of New York Andrew Cuomo has been accused of saying inappropriate, wrong, improper things to women in the workplace, and the excuse is he's just not aware of how he doesn't have the self-awareness to understand that women might take that offensive or didn't at the time, and now he's just realizing, wow, that. So that kind of this discussion of people can use words and we assume they mean things. They could be just dumb. That's his excuse right now. Is I didn't mean it the way.
I think there is some truth to some of that, right? Because it was allowed for a long time. For a long time, it was okay for men to be this way, and women took it, and things have shifted. Women are like, whoa, no, hey, it's not okay anymore. So women have started to shift out of allowing that, and men have started to shift out of doing it. So there has to be at some point some recognition of we're all learning. We're all in a learning mode. Not that I'm excusing his behavior by any stretch of the imagination. There are two sides to that coin. Was she clear and was he clear? Was he really that unaware? I don't know. I don't really follow the news. I don't really know what the accusations are. I just know my own personal story of having had men be inappropriate with me. And I was very clear with them. This is inappropriate. Not okay with it.
Right.
Oh, okay, sorry. So it was this, I didn't mean that. Or one man was very much like, well, I'm the boss. I said, I don't give a what. And so, whatever. But I was always kind of that person, right? I was very clear where my lines were. And so in my being clear, I was able to be clear with somebody else where my line was and say, this is not appropriate. And I was in a working place where I knew that I could go and talk to HR and have that dealt with if I needed to.
Sometimes it's just like we said before, though. It's a matter of, and you just brought it up, is defining where your boundaries are, but doing it in a direct way without involving HR, and in the moment saying, I feel like that's an inappropriate thing to say, and maybe here's why I think that's inappropriate. You probably didn't realize that you were being inappropriate.
And and that's a really good comment, because in a couple of cases, one of my male friends, he was like, oh, I didn't mean it like that, and so I explained it. I explained why I felt that it was inappropriate, and he totally got it. Was like, I am sorry. I thank you for that awareness, right? And so it's an awareness factor, and some of it is, of course, and some men they know, and some women know. Some women know that they can play that card, and so I have to ask, is it always necessary? Sometimes it is. Like the one boss that I had, he was like, I was like, all right, let's play that game. I'm going to go to HR then, right? So I kind of, he was going to cross that boundary, even though I was very clear about what my boundary was. So I wasn't going to play that game. Straight to HR.
And so much of what you teach or talk about is based on the idea of compassion and understanding. And I'm wondering, because there is a line here where forgiveness is part of compassion, right? And so understanding is part of, that forgiveness stuff. But there are some times where, and this is where it becomes a really blurry line, like in this Cuomo thing. And believe me, and I'm not just using this as an example because it's present and it's in my mind. I'm not a defender of his, but I'm looking at this from both sides of the equation now. And I'll because you're not too familiar with the details, I'll just tell you one aspect of it. One girl said he asked 10 years ago if she was attracted to older men. And that bothered her then. She didn't bring it up till now. She brought that in his face. His excuse now is, well, I was just trying to take an interest in somebody who works for me and learn more about her. Now, that seems a little far-fetched from an older man talking to a younger subordinate. And obviously it is inappropriate, but it could have been just dumb, a dumb guy thing. And now that there's a blurry line there. Where do we forgive that because he's a public figure and stuff, and a politician complicates it even more. But let's just say it was a typical business situation. Is there room for forgiveness in that, and understanding the guy have to lose his job because of that? Can there be some level of forgiveness in that compassion idea that you're talking about?
So for me personally, yes. Not knowing all of the circumstances, right? But bringing something forward 10 years later and saying, "Hey, this happened." I struggle with those kinds of things. It's like, okay, so where's your role in this? I want to ask somebody, where's your role in this? Were you clear that that's inappropriate at that time? And did he push it then? Or did you just kind of laugh it off and walk away? And at that time, 10 years ago, that was still okay. It was still okay. I'm not saying that it was, because 10 years ago is when I was like, no, because I knew what my boundaries were. There's a level of responsibility on our parts as women to be very clear about our boundaries. And there's a level of responsibility on a man's part to be very clear that, she put up that wall. I'm going to respect that and back away from it. So there's a responsibility on both sides of that fence.
Right. And I don't want to really.
Important.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making here. Not necessarily to defend Andrew Cuomo or to convict him of anything. That I just brought it up because those are particulars in my mind. But there are some lines where forgiveness is an important part of it, acknowledging that it was a mistake and all that stuff, where we don't have to, not everything has to go to DEFCON 5, right? Everything is like, because there's a long way from saying dumb things, saying inappropriate things, and not correcting the behavior versus like real physical. Yeah. So that's a big part of it. And so I think everybody deserves at least that second chance to correct the behavior. And if they don't acknowledge it and correct it, that's when we should take action on it. But it's a difficult, and it will remain complicated, right?
It's a complicated, there are a lot of fine lines on this one, and that topic and that subject, and so that's where I'm back to being clear about boundaries, using compassion when you are dealing with people, being very clear about what words you're using and the energy behind the words, and understanding that there is a distorted behavior that a lot of people step into, and you do have a choice about stepping out of that distortion into a more powerful, empowering kind of language and energy that you can lead with. But it's kind of when you get into situations like that, it can be a challenge.
Right. The idea, though, that compassion is part of, I guess we're agreeing on this, that compassion is seen as part of the feminine energy, for part of this.
I think so, more than I do. Although my very first boss was a compassionate man. He knew that he was an electrical engineer, a stereotypical electrical engineer who knew he had communication issues. And he still wanted to be connected and be compassionate and be caring of people around him. And he was in stark contrast with some of the other men that I worked with at that particular location.
Well, I think both genders need to hear this. And again, because what you're pointing out is that having feminine energies does not make you don't have to have a woman to be that, and having masculine energies, you don't have to be a man. I know that I have feminine energies, and nobody would ever even make the mistake of thinking I was anyway effeminate in any way, right? But and I think it's important to realize that both genders have these.
We all have.
And some of them are necessary for us to learn or adapt and strengthen and get those skills. And for a lot of men, of men in the business world, compassion is probably the hugest one, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
definitely. My father was a very compassionate, loving, giving man, and nobody would ever have looked at my dad and thought him anything other than just a really nice guy, right? He was just a compassionate man. And my husband, when I first met him, people would go around him because he was just that strong, kind of stern looking guy, if you just saw him, but he's got such a big heart. So it's really interesting that people think of it as only women, but it's not. Men have it too, for sure.
Fascinating talk, and I think that there's a lot more to this subject that where I could go on for days, kind of trying to figure out where the actual lines should be drawn, and where I have your
Yeah.
website running across the bottom of the screen. It's reneemurata.com, folks. On the audio side, the links are in the description. Now, who are you working? Are you working with individuals? You working with teams and leadership?
So I work with individuals. I also have a course that I'm getting ready to launch for a group of people, but I also work with corporate, and I also work with corporate.
And
Yeah.
is it C-level executives or is it man and middle management?
Middle and up. So,
Okay,
and if somebody, comes to me and they're not in a C level or they're not in a middle management, but they know that's where they want to go, right? Those are the people that I also like to work with them because they can really make a difference in their lives too.
great. I appreciate your time here and
Thank
insights.
you.
I hope we learned something here today. I know I did, but it generally takes me a couple of hours to figure out exactly what it was.